Sudan, a country with a long, complex, and often painful history, shaped by empires, revolutions, civil wars, and deep political fractures. Today, Sudan is once again at the center of one of the world's most devastating conflicts. But to understand how it got here, we need to go back, way back. The territory of Sudan is geographically part of a large African region, also known as Sudan. The term is derived from Arabic, bilad as Sudan, or land of the black people. For thousands of years, this region formed part of a much larger cultural belt across Africa, influenced by ancient kingdoms, migration, trade, and conquest. But today, our story begins in the late 19th century under Anglo-Egyptian rule. After defeating the Mahdist state in a decisive victory at the Battle of Omdurman in 1898, Britain and Egypt created the Anglo-Egyptian Sudan in 1899. On paper, it was jointly administered by both countries. In reality, Britain called the shots. Much to the revulsion of Egyptian and Sudanese nationalists, Sudan was effectively administered as a British imperial possession. The Brits wanted control of the Nile and the Suez Canal, which were strategic lifelines of the empire. So they did what they knew best and employed their favorite tactic: divide and rule. They split Sudan into two, a Muslim Arabic-speaking north and a larger Christian and animist south, where English was encouraged through missionary schools. They also frustrated all efforts to unite Egypt and Sudan. This division would poison Sudanese politics for decades. During World War I, they further expanded Sudan by invading Darfur in 1916, again without asking the people who lived there. Pressure for independence grew. In February 1953, Britain and Egypt signed an agreement granting Sudan self-government and self-determination. The transitional period towards independence began with the inauguration of the first parliament in 1954. And by January 1st, 1956, Sudan became fully independent, bringing an end to its nearly 136-year union with Egypt and its 56-year occupation by the British.
The world has gained a new nation. The Sudan, for 58 years under the joint rule of Britain and Egypt, becomes an independent republic.
But peace did not last. Just months before independence, in 18th August 1955, an army revolt known as the Torit Mutiny broke out. Although quickly suppressed, it led to a low-level guerrilla insurgency by former southern rebels and marked the beginning of the First Sudanese Civil War, the Anyanya Rebellion. The South felt betrayed. The North ignored its promises of federalism and autonomy. The rebellion was a long, protracted, bloody war fought from 1955 to 1972, 17 brutal years. Estimates put the death toll to around 1 million people. It finally ended in 1972 with the Addis Ababa Agreement, giving the South limited self-rule.
An agreement has been reached between our delegation and the delegation of the Sudan government in late February this year. And very recently, I have been to Addis Ababa to ratify the agreement, bringing to an end the civil war that took place in the Sudan for over 16 years.
But like many compromises in Sudan, the peace was fragile. A decade of relative peace followed, though the Addis Ababa Agreement failed to dispel the tensions that had originally caused the war. The agreement proved to be only a temporary respite. Resource infringements and marginalization by the North led to increased unrest in the South starting in the late 1970s. The real tipping point came in 1983 when the then president Jafar Nimeiri declared Sudan an Islamic state under Sharia law, including the non-Muslim South. The Southern Sudan Autonomous Region was abolished on 5th June 1983, ending the Addis Ababa Agreement. This ignited the Second Sudanese Civil War.
This is Radio SPLA, the voice of the Sudanese Revolutionary Armed Struggle.
This was the genesis of a new rebel movement, the Sudan People's Liberation Army led by John Garang. The conflict was catastrophic.
What's up?
Roughly 2 million people died as a result of war, famine, and disease. The civilian death toll is one of the highest of any war since World War II. 4 million people in southern Sudan were displaced at least once, normally repeatedly during the war. The war was marked by numerous human rights violations, including slavery and mass killings. Amid the chaos, in June 1989, Colonel Omar al-Bashir overthrew the government with the Revolutionary Command Council for National Salvation, a military junta of 15 military officers assisted by a civilian cabinet. He ruled with an iron fist, a rule marked by authoritarianism, genocides, human rights violations, severe economic decline, and brutal counter-insurgency campaigns. To crush uprisings by non-Arab tribes in the Nuba Mountains, al-Bashir relied upon a ragtag group of Arab militias that were drawn from camel-trading tribes active in Darfur and portions of Chad. These were known as the Janjaweed, or devils on horseback. These militias, responsible for mass killing, rape, and the burning of entire villages, became the foundation of a new state-sanctioned force. In March 2009, Bashir became the first sitting head of state to be indicted by the International Criminal Court for allegedly directing a campaign of mass killing, rape, and pillage against civilians in Darfur.
The International Criminal Court has today issued a warrant for the arrest of President Omar Hassan al-Bashir, President of the Republic of Sudan, for his alleged responsibility for crimes committed in Darfur.
In 2013, he reorganized the Janjaweed into the Rapid Support Forces, led by Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, aka Hemedti, a popular nickname generally understood to mean Little Mohammed. In 2017, a new law gave the RSF the status of, quote, an independent security force. Hemedti received several gold mines in Darfur as patronage from al-Bashir, and he became one of the wealthiest men in Sudan. During this time, the RSF developed a working relationship with the Russian private military outfit Wagner Group. If you know anything about this group, they are bad news, accused of war crimes, human rights abuses, and the exploitation of natural resources in several countries. These relationships ensured that RSF forces grew into a capable and powerful military force. Bashir allowed the RSF and other armed groups to proliferate to prevent threats to the country's security from within the armed forces. This was a calculated move, a practice known as coup-proofing. He understood that if the SAF tried to overthrow him, he would rely on the RSF to save him. And boy was he wrong. Peace talks between the southern rebels and the government made substantial progress throughout 2003 and 2004. They culminated in the end of the war with the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement on January 9, 2005. The agreement allowed 6 years of autonomy for the South, followed by a referendum on independence. Jobs were split between the Northerners and the Southerners according to varying ratios, and a 50-50 split on oil revenue. In February 2011, South Sudan voted overwhelmingly to secede, 98% to be exact.
I feel good, man. I feel good. I like it. I'm happy. I'm free. Like that.
This meant that Sudan lost 35% of its land and majority of its oil reserves, as most oil fields were located in the south. Economically, the north was crippled, and border disputes and internal conflicts raged on. In 2018, demonstrations erupted after the government tripled the price of goods amidst economic hardships. The government retaliated by arresting more than 800 opposition figures and killing over 40. Finally, in 2019, a joint effort between RSF and the SAF ousted President al-Bashir. But when civilians demanded full democratic rule, the military responded with violence in what is now known as the Khartoum massacre. It left over 100 dead. The protests came to an end when the Forces for Freedom and Change and Transitional Military Council signed the July 2019 political agreement and the August 2019 draft constitutional declaration. The transitional institutions and procedures included a joint civilian-military sovereignty council led by Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, head of the judiciary Nemat Abdullah Khair, and a roadmap to elections. Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok initiated talks with the IMF aimed at stabilizing the economy, which was in the gutters at this point. For a moment, Sudan had hope. In late 2021, two military coups within a month of each other resulted in the deposition of the civilian government, with Abdel Fattah al-Burhan as the de facto head of state. Hamdok was briefly reinstated as prime minister, but in January he resigned, following one of the most deadly protests to date. 87 people were killed, with over 1,000 others being detained. The transition collapsed. By 2023, tensions between Burhan of the Sudan Armed Forces and Hemedti of the Rapid Support Forces exploded. The two forces disagreed over how fast the RSF should be integrated into the army. The RSF insisted on a 10-year timetable for its integration into the regular army, while the army demanded integration within 2 years. They also disagreed on who would command the unified forces and who would control Sudan's future political system. On April 15, 2023, war broke out. The RSF and SAF fought in the streets of Khartoum, street to street, like a Call of Duty Modern Warfare combat mission. The battle-hardened RSF forces quickly overwhelmed the SAF in Darfur, capturing strategic SAF strongholds. One of them was Nyala, which had an international airport that allowed the RSF to receive critical international supplies. Zalingei, the central Darfur's capital, was captured without a fight. RSF then turned their sights on Jenaina, where they captured hundreds of SAF fighters. They didn't stop there. They captured most of Khartoum and forced the SAF further north into Port Sudan. They captured Wad Madani, the capital of Khartoum, and dramatically widened the front lines and opened up large parts of the country to potential RSF offensives. SAF was getting pummeled. Al-Burhan resorted to arming civilian militias to bolster up SAF numbers. However, in January 2025, the tides started to change, with SAF launching counter-offensives against the RSF. They made large gains in Gezira and some gains in North Kordofan, followed by the recapture of Hajj Abdallah after a tense battle that inflicted losses on the RSF. They attacked RSF positions ruthlessly, leading to RSF's withdrawal from various strongholds. These successful offensives led to the SAF retaking control of Wad Madani on January 11. In February, the RSF declared a rival government in Nairobi, which the SAF-aligned administration refused to recognize.
The Kenyan government today appeared to openly embrace one of Sudan's warring factions, with the paramilitary group RSF staging a rally at the historic plenary hall of the Kenyatta International Convention Center here in Nairobi.
On the 21st of March, the SAF captured the presidential palace in Khartoum. A day later, they recaptured the headquarters of the Central Bank of Sudan and the General Intelligence Service in Khartoum. On the 26th of March, they retook Khartoum International Airport and Jebel Aulia, regarded as the RSF's last stronghold in the capital. On 20th May, the SAF announced the clearing of Khartoum state from the RSF. Earlier on November 2024, the SAF reportedly shifted tactics, withdrawing from outer bases to lure RSF forces into trap engagements, especially in the southern axis of al-Bashir. The RSF was also mobilizing additional fighters across Darfur, preparing to attack the city. They staged air and ground assaults on the city's hospitals and camps. In April, they launched a major offensive in North Darfur, aiming to capture al-Bashir, the last state capital in the region under SAF RSF control. Beginning on 11th April, RSF ground and aerial assaults struck al-Bashir and surrounding displacement camps, including the Zamzam refugee camp and Abu Shuk. Within a couple of days, they took over Zamzam camp after intense fighting that left over 200 civilians dead. On 30th June 2025, RSF launched a barrage of artillery fire targeted at SAF positions in southern al-Bashir, which the SAF responded to with artillery and drone strikes. Throughout the siege of al-Bashir, the RSF had erected earthen berms encircling the city from the north, west, and east, essentially forming a kill-box environment that severely restricted SAF resupply and civilian movement. On September 19th, the RSF pushed towards SAF positions in the southwest of the city. By this time, the siege conditions had degraded SAF supply lines significantly. SAF fighters suffered from hunger, low morale, and desertion as food, ammunition, and medical supplies dwindled. RSF was chipping away at SAF defenses, slowly penetrating the city's periphery. In October, the RSF took complete control of the headquarters of the 6th Infantry Division, the main SAF base in al-Bashir. On October 28th, General al-Burhan confirmed that the SAF had withdrawn from al-Bashir, confirming RSF control over the city. The city and its inhabitants were on their own. More than 2,500 civilians were summarily executed by the RSF following the fall of al-Bashir. Sources revealed the army death toll during the battle from April 2023 to 30th August 2025 was at around 8,600. Think about that. The situation is horrendous. With this victory, the RSF has effectively consolidated their control over the entire Darfur region. Sudan now stands divided, almost in two. So what's next? Analysts warn that Sudan is heading toward a de facto partition. On the one hand, SAF aligned east and center, and RSF controlled west and south. Both sides claim to represent the whole country, but the map on the ground tells a different story. So what happens if one side wins? If the RSF emerges victorious, Sudan may effectively become a militia-ruled state. Hemedti's power base is built on patronage networks, gold revenues, and foreign backers like the UAE and elements of Russia's Wagner-linked networks. Darfur-style governance could spread nationwide. This means local warlords, ethnic militias, fragmented authority, and widespread human rights abuses. International recognition becomes complicated. Most Western countries will reject RSF rule, but some regional powers may recognize or work with them for strategic reasons. Sudan might break apart permanently. Peripheral regions may demand autonomy or secession. Furthermore, a long insurgency against RSF rule is almost guaranteed. SAF remnants, tribal forces, and urban resistance groups would fight on. So what would happen if the SAF wins? An SAF victory doesn't automatically mean stability. It might mean that Sudan returns to a military dictatorship. In all likelihood, Burhan's rule would resemble past regimes, centralized, authoritarian, and suspicious of civilian politics. Reconstruction will be slow and painful. Khartoum is destroyed, industries have collapsed, and millions have been displaced. Deep political fractures might remain unresolved. Sudan's core problem is the fight between military, Islamist warlords, and civilians. This will not disappear. Darfur might remain volatile. Even if the SAF wins nationally, RSF-aligned tribes and militias will continue to fight. At the end of the day, the risk of another coup stays high. Sudan's military has a long history of turning on itself. In conclusion, Sudan's conflict is the product of a century of manipulation, division, and competing power structures, from colonial rule to modern-day militia politics. Regardless of who wins, Sudan faces a long and uncertain road ahead. What remains clear is this: the Sudanese people have paid the highest price, and their fight for peace, dignity, and stability continues. If you found this story fascinating, make sure to like, share, and subscribe.